Hi everybody, and welcome to the second episode of On Brand, where we talk to leaders from across the network about some of the trends that are driving the ways that we build brands for today and for tomorrow. It's the first episode of 2019, so what better time than to talk about the year ahead? We've recently published the Adspend Report for 2019, as well as Carat's media trends for this year. So I'm really delighted to be joined today by Balázs Kaposi, Global Head of Investment at Amplifi Global. Thank you, Balázs, for joining us. So Balázs joined Dan in 2014 as investment director, looking after the investment element of all global pitches and existing client delivery, having worked at Publicis, Carat, OMD and Zenith Optimedia. I'm also joined by Dan Calladine, hi Dan, who is basically head of media futures at Carat Global and has worked within the media industry for the past 20 years at consultancies, tech companies and agencies, and for the past 10 years has written trends reports as head of media futures at Carat Global. Interesting fact, Dan is also an influencer with 40,000 followers for his London food Instagram account. So any foodies out there who need tips, get in touch with Dan. But if there are any questions about more wide kind of 2019 trends in media and advertising, please do send through your comments in our Facebook post or on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and we'll do our best to address those for you today. So to kick off, Balázs, we recently launched Adspend, which Amplifi helped build.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about who Amplifi is, what they do?
Yeah, so Amplifi is the strategic investment arm of Dan Calladine network. Most of the trading and most of the buying is done through the Amplifi people throughout our sort of community across the world. To simply view us that we've got three main pillars. One is investment management, which I head up here in our London office. The second one is looking at it's called MNet, which is our programmatic buying solution, our trading desk for our client. And the third one is GMPs, Global Media Partnerships, working on establishing the right partnerships that we've got with the key partners that we identified.
Great. And the Adspend Report, why do we produce it, and how does it bring value to us and our clients?
So we've been, this is the 18th or the 19th edition of this report, because it started back in 2000, and it was a genuine sort of interest and need from the clients to see, where is the market going, where are the spends going, what's happening, where are the audiences shifting, etc., etc. And as it evolved, it became not only a tool for advertisers to see, how TV is doing or how digital is doing, but it's very much a business facilitator, because we heard that sometimes they're using it for M&A activities to say, okay, which market we should be looking at, where should I, put my money, what is the trend that I should be aware of, and then without, even for ourselves, we're looking at it. So it's a very useful document for a lot of parts of our businesses, compared to some of the other ones, if I may, because there are some others out there. Our report is quite exhaustive, I would say. It's 59 markets that are involved in that. 180 people across the globe is contributing to this document, and I would say that it's one of the most balanced documents out there, if I compare it to some of the other ones, because we're not only focusing on the commentary or the statistics, but a little bit on equal parts on both of it, right? So when you're reading it, you're not immersed by thousands of pages of data, or not only have the fluffy side of context, but you've got a nice blend from each part.
Yeah, and if you were to kind of give a quick recap of some of the key takeaways from the Adspend Report for this year.
Sure. I mean, the big number is the global growth, which is the global spend growth, which is now 3.8%. That's our prediction for 2019. This is more or less in line with some of the other agencies' forecast. When we dig into the offline bit is stable, flat year on year, and all of the growth, or most of the growth, is coming from the digital side. Digital is expected to grow 12% year on year from 2018 to 2019. some of the key markets, or I would say all of the markets are positive, but some of the big markets like China, USA are particularly doing all right. The USA is doing 3% in 2019 according to our calculations or our estimates. China is around the 10% mark. And then when we're looking at some of the other emerging markets like India, Russia, we are also seeing very positive numbers in 2019. Europe is also in a positive territory. UK, despite all of the sort of the ambiguities around what's going to happen with Brexit, in 2019 we believe it is going to grow by 6%. It's the strongest growth that we see in Europe. So it's quite encouraging for everybody living and working in the UK that there is a future out there. But when we look at France, Germany, Italy, Spain, some of the core European markets, we are seeing also positive numbers. So we're very confident and very positive about 2019.
Some pleasantly surprising findings by the sounds of it.
Yes, and we were very happy when we received these figures from our network.
That's brilliant. Yes. Brilliant news for us and for our clients.
Yes.
So it's interesting because obviously the trends in ad spend reflect the sort of macro trends that we're seeing in terms of shifting consumer behaviours and emerging channels. So, Dan, your media report, your 10 trends for the Carat report kind of build on that from media landscape point of view. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work with Carat and in particular this report and what value it brings?
Yeah, sure. So my role within Carat is really to understand a lot about technology, a lot about what's happening in the future. So for example, I get asked a lot of questions about blockchain. Blockchain was one of the trends for last year, which has sort of continued to grow, to be honest. But also what I do is I do quite a lot of liaison with new startups and new technology companies, and quite often I get them referred through to me, or I actively go out to try to find ones, and then I'll sort of assess their quality, and if they're really good, then I'll introduce them to people around the network. And quite a few of I've introduced people to quite a few of my colleagues who we've now signed contracts with and things like that, which is really good. And as part of this, every year what I do is it started off about 10 years ago really as a way of taking stock and then thinking what might be happening next year. And then over time it's sort of developed momentum, but also it's turned into a bit of a production number. So, for example, yesterday we had a discussion panel which we broadcast on Facebook Live with myself, a colleague, and also people from Instagram and Spotify. And what the report really tries to do is to focus our minds on things that are likely to happen over the next year. And there's nothing completely outlandish in it. I'm not sort of predicting anything all that extraordinary, but what I am saying is here are things which are really interesting, which are happening in some parts of the world but aren't global yet, and that we expect, these seem to be very good ideas, seem to reflect human nature, and we expect to be taken up in more countries. And also here are things which really innovative companies are doing, which again are really good ideas that we think other companies should be doing as well. And so the 10 trends are really a combination of those things.
Interesting. And there are a few trends in there around the shifting landscape in social media, contextual commerce, gamification of messaging. And interestingly, last year in your report, you talked about the influence of China in driving that. Would you say that's still the case?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think China's still very actively investing in Western companies. So, for example, Tencent owns, I think it's about 12% of Snapchat. And also one of the big hits of last year and increasingly this year is an app called TikTok, which used to be called Musical.ly, and that's a Chinese company. And so they're becoming big, they're becoming big globally, whereas previously, I think a lot of people had thought that a lot of the services in China simply copy what is popular in Europe, and so I think a lot of a lot of ideas from China, a lot of investment from China is actually influencing the way that an awful lot of us interact with media and spend our times, the services we spend our times on.
Yeah. And Balázs, would you say that you're seeing that trend reflected in ad spend?
No, absolutely. Previously we were talking about China being very much mobile first, and it's very much the case in the ad spend category, because in 2015 digital has already overtaken offline in ad spend, and today it's the number one spend category in China. 63% of total spend is spent in digital. To put that into perspective, in China we're estimating roughly around $100 billion annual ad spend. So 60 billion of that is in digital, right? Within the digital space, so within that 60 billion, mobile represents 70%, right? So it's a very important part of the mix, and within that, mobile, of course, social and e-commerce are the two main pillars that we see. So this is where ad spend is going to. So this is the area that is growing. So in China, 20% growth in digital, where all the other media are actually in decline. So absolutely in line with the other trends. Yes.
And are you seeing that reflected in other parts of the world? Are you seeing that as a global macro trend, or? We
do. While every market is slightly different, this is something that is coming back in every market. So the growth of digital, the importance of mobile, the importance of social is coming back, is recurring in most of the markets. So in the USA, if we compare it to the biggest ad spend market in the world, in the USA, digital is overtaking TV this year, right? And it's a very big thing. I mean, everybody knows about the upfronts, the big broadcast deals that are happening in the USA. This year, 40% of total spend is going to be spent through digital channels. So it's a very big thing. And of that, a similar size, around 60 to 70% of that digital is going to be spent on mobile. So a lot of spend is going to that. So I think finally we can say that it's a year of the mobile. We've been talking about that, joking about that industry, but it is very much a mobile-driven industry these days, I would say.
I mean, social and mobile aside, though, there are kind of growth trends in out-of-home as well, right?
Yes, there are. So, and we might be talking about it a little bit later, but what we're seeing on the out-of-home side is that the vendors are moving with the time, which means that they're investing in tech solutions, and they're investing in like physical distributions, like digital out-of-home panels. This is a big trend that we see not only in the UK but also in the USA and other parts of the world. So big companies like GC Decor, CBS are investing heavily in that proposition from their side, and they're releasing inventory through that platform. So we now can buy out-of-home programmatically, which is a big step from where it was a couple of years ago, and that's one of the, I would say, the growth areas that we see in the offline part. While let's say TV is flat and print and the others are a slight decline, out-of-home is the area, or is the channel that is growing now around 4 to 6% into 2019. So it's quite a big thing there.
Yeah, and I mean, Dan, you pulled that out in your report for this year.
Yeah. So when I write the report, I talk to people in agencies around the network. So Isobar, who do a lot of creative work. I talk to iProspect, who do a lot of direct response work, and I also talk to Posterscope. And when I was talking to them at quite an early sort of exploratory stage, they said, well, it's a really interesting time for out-of-home in the UK, because we don't have the final figures in yet, but we expect 2018 to be the first year in which digital out-of-home spend overtakes non-digital out-of-home spend. And I've seen figures for like the first 9 months, and definitely that trend seems to be holding up. And what's really interesting about that is that digital out-of-home gives you an awful lot of flexibility. So, for example, you can change the copy pretty much at will. Balázs was talking about buying programmatically, but you can sort of set trigger events like the result of a football match, or weather when it starts snowing, or what the temperature drops to, or something. And what it also means is that unlike obviously with a piece of paper pasted onto a board, you can change the creative very quickly, so that the message, if the message becomes out of date, then you can change it. And so what they're doing, for example, is a lot of work with retailers, and they can tie the message into the inventory levels, so you're never advertising something which has gone out of stock. Which is which means that a lot of these people are more likely to invest in out of home, where previously they might have thought, well, it's a bit of a risk to do it, because if the ad works too well, then we're wasting 2 weeks.
If I may add just a very little, from one of our clients, Burger King, we're absolutely on this track, and we do go with them with proposition, because as you know, with Burger King, weather is a big thing, and also the geography is very important, which part you're in the town you are. So with Burger King, we are doing some very innovative campaigns with predominantly building on digital out-of-home capabilities and solutions that are available, for example, in the UK.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just symptomatic of a wider growth in digital and data-led strategies. Balázs, would you say in the sort of Adspend report there are any kind of preconceived ideas around a post-GDPR world that have been illuminated?
I mean, everybody was, I think, all of the agencies, all the advertisers, and even on the vendor side and the media owner side, we were very nervous about what is going to happen after GDPR come in practice, and we were preparing for months, and there were town halls and workshops and councils and all the necessary paperwork have been signed and done, and everybody was preparing for Armageddon, and none of that happened. What actually happened is that every party or every actor within this field became a little bit more grown up, a little bit more diligent, a little bit more professional in the way that we are dealing with each other. We were more sensitive and we were more careful with the data that even a supplier would provide to us, right? So that happened. So we became we did a little bit of housework, if I say that, or housekeeping. But the growth hasn't declined, or it didn't stop. Programmatic as an overall is also expected to grow roughly about 20% year on year. So demand is very much there from the advertiser side, and when we're looking at the supply side, so all of the exchanges or the vendors, releasing inventory through the platforms. While there might be some exceptional cases here and there, overall we didn't see a drop. It's just actually better quality and cleaner inventory that we can tap into and we can connect our advertisers with. So if I may say that, actually it's for the better. We're more diligent, more professional, and with that, clients are happier or more comfortable in allocating more spend in that field. Yeah,
I definitely think that's being echoed. And Dan, yesterday in the panel, you were talking about how limitation drives creativity, and actually this kind of rise of more contextual-based targeting.
Yes. So what was really interesting as a result of GDPR and as a result of all the preparations of GDPR is that the whole idea of contextual advertising seems to have been reinvented or supercharged, or however you want to look at it. And the classic idea of contextual advertising is, if we're advertising a car, we'll put it into a car magazine, or we think these people who do these hobbies drive cars, so therefore we'll put it into and then online it was things like, if you're advertising a holiday, let's put it against an article which has the word beach within the article, and that obviously that's a very, very simplistic way of looking at it. But what's happened over the last year or so is that a lot of work has been done in trying to move into understanding the full context of the article as a whole, and particularly what sort of emotion it triggers in people. So work by the New York Times, the Washington Post, News UK, ESPN, and several other publishers are basically trying to work out what sort of emotion their content would trigger, and then trying to work out which advertising would work best against those emotions, obviously in conjunction with agencies, so that hopefully the advertising will work really well, but not actually be targeting people on their own personal data. So, but obviously, as a result of that, or in tandem with that, what we need to do as agencies is to make sure that we ramp up our measurements, so that if we think this ad is going to work very well in the context of a happy article, then let's actually check that it does, rather than just using some sort of gut instinct and saying, this is what we chose to buy for you.
Yeah, and obviously with 5G down the line,
yes,
do you see that impacting our targeting capabilities?
I think 5G is going to be really fascinating in that so one thing is I think people will be watching more video because they'll be able to watch more video, and they'll be watching different sorts of video, so potentially less grainy, less homemade sorts of content, and more professional things. For example, it would take you much less time to download a full-length HD movie with 5G than it would with the current 4G. But I think also what is going to happen is that there's simply going to be more data, there's going to be more measurement, so there'll be more sensors within street furniture. People will be having more wearable devices that will be tracking them at more times of the day, and also cars will be more connected, so there'll be all that data potentially flowing around the system. And then with all of these, we can use these and AI to try to work out the context of how people might be seeing different messages, and what sort of situations people are in, what sorts of moods they might be in based on everything we know about the world around them, and really trying to use that to give them the right messages at the right time and to make the advertising as effective as possible.
Yeah, and I guess with that sort of movement then, and expanding targeting capability, and I think more awareness of how much data is out there, would you say that there's almost a bit of a backlash now with people being a little bit more kind of...
Well, so the final trend we identified and we wrote about in the report was the rise of the idea of a digital detox. So it's the idea that we spend too much time looking at our screens, our kids spend too much time looking at screens, and the idea that actually can we turn off for a bit? Can we be more disciplined about this? Can we be less enthralled to our devices and more in control of the relationship, I suppose? And so various organisations like schools are banning phone use or trying to discourage the use of devices. But also what's really interesting is that some of the tech giants like Apple, like Facebook, like YouTube have introduced tools over the last 6 months or so that are designed to let people know how much time they are actually spending. So initially to actually just tell them what their behaviour is, and then also provide tools like alerts to say, by the way, did you realise you'd be doing this for half an hour or something? And then also there are things like productivity tools that if you're working on your laptop, it won't let you visit things like Facebook and Twitter while over a set amount of time, so you can actually resist those temptations more easily.
But I suppose with that comes more opportunity, right, for brands to think differently about how they build experiences for their customers and products.
Yeah, so we're also seeing some quite interesting startups. So one that we met is a company called Hold, where they have an app which currently is only available to students and only available in Scandinavia and the UK. And this actually gives the students points for not using their devices. So you open the app, you tap the screen to put your device on hold, so to speak, and then for every 20 minutes, and they've identified 20 minutes as a good amount of time for concentration, for every 20 minutes that you don't use it, you get 10 points, and then there's a marketplace where you can trade these points for things like free
like a Black Mirror episode.
So it is very much like a Black Mirror episode, and it's taken us 24 minutes to get to the first mention of Black Mirror, which is quite good for a futures discussion. Yeah, but I think it's really interesting that people are thinking really creatively about this problem, and trying to use incentives and encouragement to make people more mindful about how they use their devices. I mean, I use some of these tools, and what I find is that I'm able to concentrate much more if I'm watching TV because my phone is in the other room.
Yeah.
Because and also, by the way, it's charging as well because I've used it so much during the day. But I think it just helps your mind. It removes temptations. It just says to your brain, we're watching this TV program for an hour, and let's not multitask. Let's not do anything else. Let's just concentrate on this.
Well, it was interesting hearing from Spotify on the panel yesterday about the sort of rise in audio branding and sonic branding and podcasts, and actually that, in some ways, some people turn off by switching to audio.
Yes, and that's the thing as well, actually, in that I think where people talk about a digital detox, they don't see music as something that they should be detoxing from. So they're not sort of thinking they should be in silence. But it's the idea of your eyes looking at screens and constant distractions and things, rather than having a flow. I mean, also I think what's really interesting is that there are more book groups, there are more people doing challenges on things like Goodreads for how many books they're trying to read this year. So I think people are trying to sort of limit their distractions and trying to take more control really of how they spend their time with their devices.
Interesting. I mean, there are so many trends to think about this year. Balázs, from an advertiser perspective, what do you think is the one trend that's really going to disrupt, or one that we should really keep front of mind this year?
Well, if we want to go Black Mirror, we can go Black Mirror. But what we are seeing, and we've been talking about the sort of the technology becoming, or advertising being a tech industry at this stage. Most of the digital inventory is already traded programmatically. We talked about the digital out of home and how digital out of home is becoming and is traded programmatically. TV, to a certain extent, is also already traded, or some parts of the inventory is available on exchanges through addressable TV or programmatic TV or OTTs and all of that. And in terms of disruption, I would say that this gives us a good indication of where this industry is going. So it's not that far away when we will have all of these inventories sort of traded on similar to a stock exchange, where all of the vendors, sellers and buyers come together and say, okay, what do you have, what do I need, and then exchange openly on that platform. And again, it wouldn't be sort of limited to, let's say, just a social or a mobile inventory, but it will be all of the inventories that an advertiser would be using in their media mix, right? And having that technological solution where there is feasible, I would say that it's not that far down the line. So it is coming, it will be there, and that's something I think advertisers should start preparing for.
A one-stop shop.
Yeah.
And from a consumer perspective, Dan, which of the trends do you think is most kind of prominent this year?
I think, so we don't know whether this is going to happen, but I think the thing which is most interesting is how there is going to be more of a blurring of social and shopping. So currently, you can get a lot of inspiration about what to buy within social channels like Facebook and Instagram, but you can't actually directly shop through those. Whereas if we look to Asia with services like WeChat, people put in their payment details, people put in their addresses so they can just order things, a few taps. They don't need to go to a third-party site to do it. So what I don't know when this is going to happen. It may not happen this year, but I think when it does happen, it will make quite a big change to a lot of consumers' lives, particularly if they use social media quite a lot. And I think quite a lot of people would really welcome the idea, and quite a lot of brands would really welcome the idea to be able to buy things through their social channels, because it would just make perfect sense. You see something advertised on Instagram, boom, it's on its way.
It's basically a shop window, right?
Yeah, it's on its way to you within 24 hours. After a couple of clicks. So I'm surprised, in a way, it's taken so long. But I think that is definitely coming. But I don't quite know when it's coming. But once it does, I think it will make a huge change to how people shop and how people perceive.
Fascinating. We've actually had a question in, so this might be one more for you, Dan. Do you think the industry landscape is still open enough for new players to enter and disrupt the industry?
I think. So the optimist in me says yes, and the optimist in me says, when you look at things like TikTok, which have come through, sort of outside the GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple ecosystem, they've come from China, then it does seem like if you have a great idea, it is possible to break through. But then also, Facebook, Instagram together are very good at taking ideas and developing their own versions of them. And so they seem to have quite successfully put a cap on the growth of Snapchat, for example. So the optimist in me says yes, because people will always have these amazing ideas, and you'll always get somebody, some bright 16-year-old having an idea that somebody in their 30s wouldn't think of, because they've grown up in different ways, they've grown up with different mindsets. But I think it is, I would say definitely it is harder than it was 10 years ago, because of the total dominance. I mean, in ad spend, for example, as well, because of the total dominance of a small number of companies. But my fingers are crossed that it will continue to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Balázs, a question for you around if, for example, a CMO or a marketing team were watching right now, which of the trends should they be potentially wary of, and how do they kind of make sense of the kind of noise right now?
I think, if there was a CMO in front of me, I would say, please read all the reports, first of all, right? Not just our reports or the Carat Trends report, but look at all of the other reports out there, publications out there, because you have to be well informed to make the right decisions. Now, after that, these reports are very much global, and it's a macro view of the world, and business challenges, as we see with all of our clients, are very different from one case to another. And within these trends, I would say every client or every advertiser or every CMO will need to define their own strategy, need to find their own avenue, and I would say define your own trend. See what is happening out there, see what the others are doing, see where the opportunities lie, but then define what is it that you want to do, that you want to stand by, which makes sense for your organization or for your function within your organization. So rather than just following the herd, know what the herd is doing, but then also define yourself. So that's what I would suggest to any CMO in this.
Dan, would you agree?
I think so, yeah. And I think just acknowledge that the world is changing so quickly. 5G is going to bring even bigger, even faster changes, and really just to acknowledge that you have to keep reinventing the way you do things. You have to keep looking in the mirror to see who's coming up fast behind you. You have to keep keep learning, keep agile.
Totally. We've got one last question through. Again, Dan, this may be more for you.
Okay.
Digital and programmatic is growing, but what about ad blocking? Does programmatic out of home provide a better alternative for brands?
Well, programmatic out of home out of home is literally the only digital media that can't be blocked by an ad blocker. Somebody did. There was a stupid thing that somebody did try where you had these special glasses that could trigger to actually make sure you didn't
not
see
Minority Report.
But in fact that's very Minority Report. But so ad blocking is a weird one. We had ad blocking in the trend report a few years ago, and it's the Adblock Apocalypse never happened. And I think part of the reason for that is that a lot of mobile advertising moved into apps away from the mobile web. And with apps, it's much harder to block because the data is all encrypted. So the ad blocker can't really work out whether something is an ad or whether something is content that people want to see. But having said that, I think ad blocking, for smaller sites and smaller services, ad blocking is still, is still a threat and is still making, is still damaging to some sorts of organisations, and I'm sure a lot of young people, a lot of certain demographics still use ad blockers a lot. And to be fair, a lot of advertising is very annoying, and there's a lot of sites that do use very annoying ad formats, and I would, you know, I would say it's very short-sighted of them to do things which seem to deliberately be designed to, or not designed to, but, you know, seem to deliberately antagonize their users more than the benefit they can be providing.
And this comes back to the innovation question that we were talking about, this all the limitations around GDPR, right? If your audience is using, you know, some sort of ad blocking, then maybe you have to come up with the content or with the formats that are actually engaging and is interesting to your audience. So it is a challenge for advertisers, but also for the agencies to say, you know what, if I'm looking at a very young audience who's likely to block certain, then maybe some of the old formats are just not, you know, the stuff that we should be thinking about. So I think it's a good thing even for this industry to say, you know what, think a little bit more outside the box, because if this is how your audience is behaving, then you have to reach them in a different way. So I think it's actually good.
And it's taking those learnings into out of home so that we don't commit the same mistakes with out of home in terms of annoying people. You don't want to do that.
Very much so.
So I think that's all we've got time for today, but thank you both for joining me today. Absolute pearls of wisdom. And thank you to those who've tuned in. Thank you for your questions and for your comments. If we couldn't get back to you today, I'm so sorry. We'll do our best to get back to you. But tune in next time when we'll be celebrating International Women's Day, talking to leaders across the network about diversity and leadership. But once again, thank you for tuning in. Do download the Carat Trends Report and the Adspend Report. Some really interesting findings in there. And until next time, thank you very much. Have a good day.